Welcome to It's Your Ego, Stupid, a show lovingly intended for millions of spiritual, intelligent, and imperfect people like you who may at times be led into ego stupidity, a lesser version of yourself and a lesser version of life. This show will give you a much deeper understanding of what ego is, what it's doing to your life, how it can weaken your human and spiritual wellness, and how you can heal in each of these areas if needed. It's Your Ego, Stupid will heighten your awareness of the intense link between your ego and spirit, your humanity and divinity, and the synergy that can lead to the best version of you and your life. Your host is Dr. Nick Martin, a licensed psychologist who has worked in the clinical, university, school, and private practice settings over the past 40 years, while serving as a therapist, diagnostician, educator, and consultant. Welcome again to It's Your Ego, Stupid. And now your host, Dr. Nick Martin.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Nick Martin, also known by some as Ego Man, due to my intense focus on ego and how it's impacting our lives, both humanly and spiritually. And I want to thank you for listening to It's Your Ego, Stupid on OMTimes Radio. The title of today's show is Roles People Live, the Racist. During the show, I'll be looking at people whose lower ego flexibility energy is leading them towards living in the role of the racist as they go about living their daily lives. A person who believes that race should have a significant impact on how people are understood and judged. A person who often views members of their own race as superior and those not of their race as inferior. A person who often exhibits racist thoughts and behaviors openly and doesn't question their immorality. However, it should be noted that many racists also engage in more subtle racist thoughts and behaviors that take the form of discrimination, some of which they are completely unaware of. The racist often emphasizes what is different about the racial group that is the target of their racism, while failing to recognize what is similar to their own racial group. They often engage in stereotyping and generalizing of the racial group that reflects the lower ego flexibility that is at work in the way they keep thinking about the racial group in these narrow and limited ways, often failing to recognize the dissimilarities and diversity existent within the racial group, that not everyone in the racial group is the same. We can find racists in bosses, supervisors, politicians, parents, friends, siblings, and even ourselves if we are willing to look close enough at our thoughts and behaviors. There are plenty of people who live in this role because there is no shortage of the supply of the lower ego flexibility energy that serves to drive people who are living in this role. Today, I'm going to take you into the racist mind by sharing with you what ego is leading them towards thinking or not thinking, feeling or not feeling, and doing or not doing, and exactly what's happening when a person is living in this role. All in the name of their survival, which is ego's ultimate and only purpose in our life, to be our survival energy, both daily and mortal. During this show, I'll be focusing on two main areas, ego's voice and spirit's voice. When I talk about ego's voice, I'm talking about the mixture of one's ego energy and one's mind. In the case of today's program, the mixture of the racist's lower ego flexibility energy and their mind. The place where their thoughts, beliefs, attitudes, values, and prejudices are formed. A place that can be called the ego mind or ego space as I refer to it in my work, and lays the foundation for their personality and racism. It's their lower ego flexibility energy that's impacting the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that the racist forms and uses in their daily life, which becomes their ego voice. Ego doesn't form the thoughts the racist is using because it can't think, and has no awareness of itself, or the energy that it is, or the person whose mind it is infiltrating. The person living in the role of racist forms the thoughts, while building on the ego energy at work in their mind. Ego just provides the fuel, the energy. When ego is impacting what's going on in the racist mind, they are listening to and speaking with ego's voice, not their own, but they often don't know it. Ego is in the foreground of their life, and they are in the background. Now, ego should be in the background of our life, and only present when needed if our survival is truly being threatened. So that's why tuning into our ego energy is one of the 3 contributors to ego medicine. We and the racist need to know whose voice we are truly listening to and speaking with in our thoughts, words, and deeds as we go about living our daily lives. Is it ego's voice or is it our voice? We want to believe it's ours, but don't kid yourself, which is something that can be easily done by many. We all need to get the real, truthful, honest, and potentially painful answer to that question. Is it ego's voice or mine? A question that most people fail to get the answer to because they don't know how to go about getting it. And that's what my work is about, helping you to get that answer and doing something about it if necessary. In a way, finding out if you're living in a role you didn't realize you were living in, just as the racist is, which is happening for many, whether they're a narcissist or a racist or a cultist or any of the roles I talk about in my programs on roles people live and in my book, The 2 Voices Within. Another way of putting it, the narcissist often doesn't know they're being a narcissist. The racist often doesn't know they're being a racist. And the cultist often doesn't know they're being a cultist because they're unaware of the ego energy operating in their mind and their life and living on a 24/7 basis. But they need to find out that answer so they can be speaking more with their own voice in their life and not ego's, or they'll just spend their life surviving and never truly and fully living. After I get done talking about ego's voice and what the racist needs to hear more from it during the 2nd segment of our program, I'm going to be sharing in the 3rd segment what the racist is unable to hear from spirit due to being kept at a distance from spirit's voice by the ego energy at work and the distancing effect it has on hearing the voice of spirit. Even though the racist has a spiritual core that we all have, due to having the love, life, and energy God is within them, they are not spiritually well. Because they can't be spiritually well in their life, due to what their ego energy is doing in it and to it. Their unhealthy, lower ego flexibility energy is not allowing them to hear about and be the love, life, and energy God is within their thoughts, words, and deeds, particularly towards the racial group that is the target of their racism. Sadly, Spirit's voice is something they may never hear and come to know, unless they heal their ego energy. Sadly, the ego energy of the racist is getting in the way of connecting to their divinity, of being their divinity in their life. Sadly, this is something that happens to many people in their life, whatever role they're living in. Many people die living in the role they had been living for 30, 40, or 50 years of their life. They never get better. Many racists never get better. They die never having really lived. They spent all their time surviving within their racist thoughts, beliefs, values, attitudes, and prejudices. With those sobering thoughts, I'll get started looking deeply into the racist by first giving you a brief description of the role of the racist, a person you may or may not be acquainted with in your personal life, but is out there in society, if not in your home, so that we can kind of be on the same page as to the role and the kind of person I'm talking about. The racist believes that race should be a significant or should have a significant impact on how people are understood and judged. So they believe looking at one's race should significantly impact on how they look and understand people and how they can judge them. Race becomes a major, if not exclusive, filter influencing how they see people, be they white, black, Asian, Hispanic, or Middle Eastern, or another race. The racist attaches qualities and characteristics based often on a person's skin color alone. And the racist has a difficult time looking more deeply at a person and seeing more deeply beneath the surface of a person's race. The racist often views members of their own race as superior and those not of their own race as inferior. The racist often carries a bias in favor of the race they are a member of. A good current example of this is captured in the term white supremacy. A good example of this at work historically are Jim Crow era and current voter laws in which the legitimacy of a person's vote has been attached to which race they belong to. Now, while racism is still widespread in today's society, the racist exhibits thoughts and behaviors more overtly and outwardly than most people and does not question their immorality. The openly racist person has no problem channeling their anger and hatred into thoughts, words, and actions which they believe are absolutely true. But this does not capture all people who are racist, as some can be what I would call closet racists, who hide their racism in subtle forms of discrimination. And some may lack awareness of their racism, even though it's not intended. I would call this racism rooted in ignorance. The racist looks upon people of a particular racial group as lacking in their thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. The racist, just as others with lower ego flexibility, looks upon difference as deficiency. So the difference of one's race is interpreted as being reflective of deficiency. In this case, a person's racial difference from the racist. This also makes it difficult to recognize and celebrate the successes of people with different racial backgrounds, as this violates the need to see racial differences as deficient. So all of the good things, the positive things that may be occurring and being exhibited in the racial group that the racist is targeting are overlooked or missed because it doesn't fit in with the need to see a racial group as being different and thus deficient from the race its own one. The rigidity and the inflexibility of their ego energy also makes it difficult to adapt their mind to the true reality of who people are. And this is the nature of lower ego flexibility. It contributes to a very rigid, inflexible world by the individual who's into this energy that blocks them from making changes and adapting their mind to things that are often different from what they already know. And this approach often serves as the basis for overt and covert discrimination against this group, this need to see them as deficient. The racist uses their heavy investment in the deficiency of other racial groups to create discriminatory practices. And the racist uses the heavy investment in the deficiency of other racial groups to justify and legitimize the use of discriminatory racial practices. So not only is creation of discriminatory practices rooted in this need to see the difference of a person's race as deficient, but also justification and legitimizing the usage of discriminatory racial practice is going on inside the mind of the racist. The racist is prone to recognize or emphasize what is different about the racial group they are targeting, while failing to acknowledge what is similar to their own racial group. So there can be very positive qualities being manifested by people in the outside group that they are targeting for their racism, but the racism doesn't want to see that, doesn't want to acknowledge that. They want to see how different racial group members are like them, because this violates their need to see them as deficient when compared to themselves. The racist also stereotypes and generalizes about members of a particular racial group while failing to recognize dissimilarities that exist within this group, the things that are different within members of this targeted racial group. The racist has difficulty seeing and understanding about the complexity existent within all racial backgrounds. The ignorance of the racist extends to lumping all members of a racial group basically into the same boat. They fail to see the diversity within other racial groups, because this requires a recognition that requires a flexible mind that the racist is often lacking due to their lower ego, flexibility, energy at work in their mind. I hope this provides you with some greater familiarity with people who are living in the role of the racist, and that you can use as a frame of reference as we go further in today's show. We're coming up on our first break. When we return, I'll be looking at what the person living in the role of the racist needs to hear and recognize from the voice of ego that's shaping the way they think, feel, and behave. This is Dr. Nick. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, and I'll see you after the break.
Conscious media for conscious minds. OMTimes. Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the Internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Hi, Dr. Nick Martin here. I want to invite you to visit my website, egoandspirit.info, where you can find lots of information on ego and download your free ebook copy of It's Your Ego Stupid. Fix it to fix your life. Also, please visit the shop page where you can find each of my other books, Ego Therapy, Ego Spiritualism, and The Two Voices Within.
Coping-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, a show for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people, just like you and me. Now we're going to take a look at the voice of ego operating in the mind of the racist. These are the kinds of thoughts rooted in lower ego flexibility energy that the racist is using to survive in their life, and that serve as the foundation for the thinking, feeling, and behaving that they make use of as they go about their daily life. These are the kind of thoughts they must come to hear, recognizing, and change if they are ever to become a better person, a whole person, and someone who can be their humanity and divinity. Ego's voice says, you must know the difference of another person's skin as their weakness, which covers and reflects all of the other weaknesses you know them to have. You do not need to look beyond the surface of their skin. The truth about them exists within your knowledge of them, and it cannot be challenged by them or others. Here the racist is teaching themselves with the help of their lower ego flexibility energy that it's important to judge people by the color of their skin. That it's important to judge people by the color of their skin. That's all you need to know to really know who people are. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but that's what happens when people are living with lower ego flexibility energy or any of the other significantly imbalanced ego energy, that the abnormal normal makes its appearance, this notion that we can know who people are by simply looking at the color of their skin. You know, for people that are living in a healthier ego energy that's more balanced, that seems so wrong. But for people who are seeing life and seeing people through this lower ego flexibility energy, it's part of their abnormal normal. The racist needs to know about a person, and that all they need to know about a person is their skin color. This very narrow, very limited way of going about getting to know people. Again, how lower ego flexibility energy works. It's a narrow, limited, there's not a need for a lot of detail in order to understand things. The kind of approach that allows one to buy into many false truths about anything that they may hear, particularly on social media. Ego is saying that the racist doesn't need to get to better know people from different racial backgrounds, because they already know what they need to know. And so that's what people in the mix of this lower ego flexibility energy begin to think, that it's not really important. I don't need to know more about who people are to come from different racial backgrounds. I already know what I need to know. And again, this is reflective of the lower ego flexibility energy at work. Ego's voice says you must see only their differences from you and none of their likeness to you. Their difference shows their inequality to you, their unworthiness, and their separation from you and those like you. You must use these differences to elevate yourself above them. Difference is your oxygen, and you must have it to ensure your survival. Here, the racist is teaching themselves, with the help of their lower ego flexibility energy, to emphasize the difference in knowing a person, which the most obvious one being their race. To emphasize the differences and to overlook, ignore, or seek to find similarities and commonalities. So the racist is teaching themselves through the energy to fail to look for anything that's common or alike or similar about people from different racial groups to their own. That we don't need to do that. To value differences because they can be a means to the racists seeing themselves as better, more worthy, and disconnected from other racial groups, which can promote their safety and survival. I've said this on previous shows and programs about lower ego flexibility energy often tends to view differentness as deficiency. And so the racist is embracing differentness as a way to seeing deficiency in others, different racial backgrounds from their own. And that the racist is not to recognize similarities and commonalities because that would endanger them. That if the racist begins to see some of the healthy qualities that may be similar to the ones that they have, that's not a good thing. That they're not supposed to look at that. They're not supposed to consider that as part of understanding people from a different racial background. That people from different racial backgrounds may enjoy religious services and find them to be quite important in their life, or the need to take care of their children and to do the things that are necessary to help them grow. But that the racist isn't going to look at that or think about those kinds of important positive things that people from a different racial background may share with them, because that violates their need to hold on tightly to the idea that people of a different racial group are deficient and are not like me. And I don't want them to be like me. Ego's voice says, you cannot love those who are different from you as you do your own. Again, you cannot love those who are different from you, in this case racially, as you do your own. You must not bear witness to their goodness, successes, or gifts, as this would represent weakness in yourself. The display of kind thoughts, words, behaviors, or feelings toward them are also weakness, and they are undeserving of these gestures. Here the racist is teaching themselves with the aid of their lower ego flexibility energy that there needs to be a distinction made between loving their own, meaning members of their racial group, and not loving others of a different racial group, making a distinction between who should and can be loved and not. And again, this is the kind of thinking that goes on in the mind of racists. This is reflective of the abnormal normal. This is reflective of ego stupidity, linked to the imbalanced ego energy that lower ego flexibility represents. That the racist shouldn't open their eyes to all of the good things that exist about the racial group that they are discriminating against, meaning opening their eyes to their successes, to their generosity, to their contributions, to their talents, even those which have benefited the racist racial group, that they are not to become aware of them, to keep them at a distance, because to embrace them would open the door to being more connected, to seeing them as worthy, to seeing them as not separate, to seeing them as equal, something that the racist doesn't want to do. That the racists shouldn't allow themselves to be loving in response to the good works of the racial groups, because that signifies weaknesses. So the racists opening themselves to loving others from different racial backgrounds is not to be done, and that this is viewed as a form of weakness by being open and receptive to people who represents deficiency and or differentness and deficiency. Ego's voice says, they must all be seen as alike and as different from you. You cannot love some of them and not others. Know them all as different so that you can remain safe. Hatred and anger for them are your friend and will keep you protected. You must also teach this to your children for their protection. Here the racist is teaching themselves with their lower ego flexibility energy to generalize and stereotype about the racial group members and not to make distinctions, to keep them all in one place, in one's understanding and knowing of them. That the racists can't allow themselves to love some members of the racial group because that opens the door to seeing them more deeply and uniquely than the racist wants to. The racist wants to hold on to a very narrow and rigid grasp or understanding. So it isn't a good thing from the vantage point of ego's energy to start to get to know people differently and to abandon racial stereotypes and generalizations. So the racist doesn't. That the racist should hold on to their anger and hatred because it will keep them safer than love will. Again, an interesting way of understanding and looking at what's going on, that anger and hatred, ego's voice, is leading the racist toward embracing when it comes to members of different racial backgrounds than love. And that the racists should pass on their racist beliefs to their children in order to protect them. Again, thinking about that and how harmful and destructive that is, but it's part of the abnormal normal. It's part of the ego stupidity going on, rooted in the lower ego flexibility energy infiltrating the mind of the racist. Ego's voice says, the love from those who are different from you must be discouraged and never accepted if offered. You must keep your distance from them, not allowing them to love you. Their thoughts, words, or deeds are only disguises that will serve to weaken you. Such gestures can only offer the illusion of being like you, equal to you, and worthy of you. You are safest when unloved by them, as their differences will not become your weakness. Their love will only weaken you and threaten your survival. Keep them as your enemy, and you will be safe. Here the racist is teaching themselves, with the help of their lower ego flexibility energy, to not accept love offered to you from those members of a different racial group, to push it away, to not open yourself up to receiving the love of others from a different racial background, particularly the one that you may be exhibiting racial hatred and bigotry and anger towards. That the thoughts and words or actions should be questioned and viewed with suspicion, so the racist isn't supposed to look upon these loving gestures and words in the way they are offered, but to question them, in a way keeping them at a distance, because doing so would risk making the outside racial group, I'll refer to it, the one they're discriminating against, risk making them connected to the racist, risk making them being viewed as equal and worthy, which would endanger the racist who's invested in seeing them as not connected, as unworthy, as unequal. And that this would endanger the racist if the outside racial group is elevated by the racist. So keeping them as an enemy is safer than allowing them to be a friend, which is the frame of reference for the racist. We have reached the end of our focus on ego's voice. I hope this has given you greater insight as to the impact of lower ego flexibility energy within the mind of the racist. We're coming up on our second break. When we return, we'll be looking at what the person living in the role of the racist is unable to hear from the voice of spirit due to the unhealthy, imbalanced ego energy that is at work. This is Dr. Nick. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, and I'll see you after the break.
The Real Conscious Connection. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, a show for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people, just like you and me. Now we'll be looking at what the voice of spirit is saying to the racist that they're unable to hear due to the blockage being caused by their lower ego flexibility energy, and the distance from their divinity that results from the thoughts and messages contained within ego's voice that I shared with you earlier. Along with coming to know ego's voice using ego medicine, the racist will need to hear the voice of spirit in order to fully heal and bring about the synergy, the merging, and the unification of their humanity and divinity. So now we'll take a look at Spirit's voice. Spirit's voice says the rigidity of your earthly mind has led to great suffering between yourself and your earthly neighbors. Within this rigidity, you are consumed by dark thoughts for your neighbors. The anger and hatred you carry for your neighbors in your thoughts, words, and deeds reflects your suffering. Here, Spirit is saying that narrow and unchanging thoughts about members of a different race have led the racist to see them with anger and hatred. And that this anger and hatred towards others is what suffering looks like. Something to be thought about. That when sometimes we think of suffering, we think of it in a much more, I want to call it a visceral perhaps, a more immediate experience of pain. And Spirit is speaking to suffering on a different level here, dealing with our emotions. And that when a person is heavily into anger and hatred, that's also suffering. That the racist anger and hatred-filled thoughts, words, and behaviors are also what suffering looks like. Because it's so removed from divine truth. Being the love, the life, and the energy God is, when we are living at a distance, being at a distance, such as is the case with the racist, that this is the suffering that's being played out within them, that they are often unaware of. When we are being what we are not, inherently, meaning inhumane, and that's what the racist is being, while having a divine essence, that's suffering. That's a conflict between the inhumanity of the racist and the divinity within their being. And I think that's a very important distinction in grasping what suffering is. Spirit's voice says, you visit the illusions of separation, unworthiness, and inequality upon your neighbors with your earthly beliefs and actions, which can only create distance from God's kingdom. This has only brought you more suffering, reflected in the distance you live from divine truth. This suffering will end as you come to know that separation, unworthiness, and inequality do not exist in God's kingdom, and that any earthly difference within your beliefs cannot make them so. Here, Spirit is saying that contained within the racist bigotry are false beliefs about people of a different race. False beliefs that they must be kept separate and treated as if they are unworthy and unequal. That the racist is carrying around this notion of keeping them at a distance and treating them as though they are unworthy and unequal. The totality of the racist actions and thoughts are built upon these illusions that are bringing them into suffering. Suffering that may be unrecognized, but is still suffering nonetheless. So whether we are aware of it or not, suffering is going on. That great distance taking place between the inhumanity of our actions if we are a racist, and our thoughts and our words, and who we truly are on a divine level, the love, life, and energy God is existent within our being. I was thinking about the character Archie Bunker as a reflection of suffering, though he was probably in denial of it. I don't know if he ever admitted to his being a racist. But just because we deny something, it doesn't make it less real. And that the racists can end their suffering when they awaken to the divine truth in their being, an awakening that will require the usage of ego medicine in order to get an understanding of their ego, and the kinds of thoughts and beliefs that they are carrying with them that are fostering the formation, in the case of today's topic, the racist thoughts and beliefs. Spirit's voice says the love, life, and energy God is exists within you and all of your neighbors. A divine truth that you do not know. You can only be the love God is at all times and in all places and with all people. Earthly beliefs cannot change this. Here, the Spirit is saying that the racist has the love, life, and energy God is within their being. That it's already a part of their being and everyone's being. That it's less about finding it than it is about awakening to it. Again, with the use of ego medicine to understand the energy and dealing with that ego energy that's getting in the way of this awareness and this awakening. Spirit is saying that there are no boundaries to this divine truth, and our being it, no matter when, or where we're at, or who we're with, that there are no conditions, person, place, or time that can exist in being it. And I think part of what's important is sometimes I think maybe racists may think that they are in a good place, in a healthy place, in a wonderful place, if they are being a very loving person with certain people and not others. And that is not what Spirit is saying. Spirit is saying we are either being it with all or we are being it with none. That the racist false beliefs involving the racial group cannot change any of this, in a way that we can't pick and choose which racial groups to be divine truth with or not. In the realm of divine truth and in the realm of our divine essence, it's sort of an all or nothing kind of thing. We must be the love, life, and energy God is with all people, irregardless of their racial background or the place we are in or the time we are there. Spirit's voice says you cannot offer or receive love for some and not for others. Love has no limitations that you can place upon it. All must be the love God is to reside in God's kingdom. Your place is waiting for you. Here, Spirit is saying being divine truth doesn't involve being selective, not only towards whom we direct it to, but also from whom it is being directed to us. So not only in the being of the love, life, and energy God is and directing it toward others, but also in our ability to receive it, to recognize its existence and all those who would offer them the love, offer up to us the love, life, and energy God is within their being. That we cannot reject or refuse love from any members of any different racial group for our own. So we can't, quote, choose, or we can't discriminate regarding who we can receive love from or not receive love from. All must be welcome in order to be within the kingdom of heaven. Because to do so would treat others, or some others from different racial groups, as separated or unequal and unworthy of us. It's a very important idea that we must receive the love God is from all. There can be no distinctions made. in being the love, the life, and the energy God is. When I was thinking about this particular comment, I was reminded of the scene in All in the Family when Sammy Davis Jr. surprises Archie Bunker with a kiss. And the look on Archie's face, it kind of said, I don't want to be kissed by this man. I don't want to be loved by him. And that is the look of a racist. Spirit's voice says, the energy God is manifests in many ways. All of the differences that you have come to know in your earthly truth as separation, unworthiness, and inequality are the energy God is within all beings. Differences that manifest the gift of God within all beings. Those different from you can be no more separated, unworthy, or unequal than you in God's kingdom. Earthly illusions cannot make them so. This divine energy has no earthly boundaries or limits. It can only be present in all places, at all times, and in all beings. There can be no distinctions within the unity and oneness of the kingdom of heaven. Here, Spirit is saying that God's presence and energy exist within all beings, no matter how similar or different they may be to the racist. That the racist is mistaken has been misled by illusions to missing the presence of God in all beings. That all differences which exist between people, including race, are part of the unity and the oneness of God and being within God's kingdom. And that there is no separation or unworthiness or inequality within the energy God is, and all people are. We have reached the end of our program today and our focus on Spirit's voice for this show. I hope what I've shared with you will allow those needing to do so to hear the voices of ego and spirit that must be heard, so that they can truly speak with more of their voice in their life and not ego's, and get on with the business of truly and authentically living, and not just surviving or existing. I want to mention that you can purchase each of my books, Ego Therapy, Ego Spiritualism, The Two Voices Within, and It's Your Ego Stupid at the online bookstores for Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Balboa Press. You can also purchase Focused Ego Meditations on the shop page of my website, egoandspirit.info, which can help you to know when you are truly speaking with your voice in your life and not ego's, as you go about healing your ego energy where needed in its power, flexibility, or vulnerability. Please feel free to email me with comments for this or any of my other shows at spiritualawakening777@comcast.net. But please do not leave any attachments, as I will be unable to open them for security reasons. I end today's show with this message. The great news is that working to heal your ego energy using ego medicine by growing your awareness of its symptoms, ego stupidity, insights, and spiritual impact will allow the divine truth in your being to flow and shine through you and allow you to fully embrace each of the divine gifts. The spiritual part of healing is a given. It's part of your endowment. Divine truth and the divine gifts are part of your heritage that already exists within you. You need do nothing more to be spiritual because you already are. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. You only need to enhance your humanity with ego medicine so that all which is available to you is given. Fix your ego to fix your life, humanly and spiritually. Thank you for listening and allowing me to be your servant. Please have a great week and do come back to my next program. In peace and love, this is Dr. Nick saying goodbye for now.